What's up, guys? Back today with another review, sort of review, more like just my experience with series. Today's piece of tech that we're gonna be talking about my hands-on experience with is none other than the OG classic Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. So getting straight into it, the first thing I really freaking love about this camera is the image quality. I could basically make a whole list of pros and cons and image quality be the only pro with a list of 10 cons and still say that this is a great camera because the image quality of this thing is, it makes me transcend. That's really weird. No, for real, this thing shoots 422 ProRes. It shoots Blackmagic RAW 12-bit with 13.5, 14 stops of dynamic range. It's as far as just pure straight image quality off the sensor, this thing is an absolute beast. And that actually leads me to the second thing that I really love about this camera, and that's just the flexibility of the recording options. All right, so you can see on this menu, there's like 12 different flavors of recording quality that you can program. All right, so we can shoot RAW in multiple compression rates, in multiple aspect ratios and resolutions. You can also shoot ProRes in multiple aspect ratios and resolutions, as well as a bunch of different options for compression. It's really cool to be able to have full hands-on control over the compression and the actual quality of your image, and the menu system on this camera just makes it so intuitive and so easy to use. And that's another thing I really love about this camera, is the menu system is just very simple, very clear on what it's talking about. You don't have to be a crazy cinematographer to understand what it's saying, but it also still gives you all the options that you need. It makes it very clear, but still gives you that full professional control. So let's talk about the actual price of the body itself. So this unit, last I checked, comes in at around $1,200. I believe that's actually around the same price that it was right when it came out. And I'm not gonna lie, this thing is pretty old. It came out in 2019, I believe. So it's quite a few years old now. Oh crap. 2019 was 4 years ago.
In 2019, I would have been 14.
I'm having
Just pop up a picture of what I looked like at 14.
I'm having like an existential crisis right now. Dude, this thing is old. Okay, well that just reinforces the point. Yeah, this thing, it's kind of old. I didn't want to come on here and be the YouTuber that's like, yo, 10 reasons why you should buy the Blackmagic Cinema or whatever in 2023. Because people always do that, and I don't mean to throw shade, but I always think it's like the people who like, you know, can't afford to review the latest gear, always like reviewing super old stuff and being like, this is why you should. And so I've seen a lot of reviews that just aren't very fair to new equipment versus old equipment, because they typically don't have both those. So I'm reviewing old equipment, but I'm not necessarily trying to review against the new equipment. I'm just saying this is my experience with it. If you're trying to pick one up in 2023, it's not any cheaper actually, but I still think it's a really good price. The price that this thing launched at in 2019 was groundbreaking, and it was crazy that you could shoot raw 4K out of, you know, a handheld body for under $2,000. That was just unheard of. So super cool. Crazy good image quality for a really good price. Next thing that I have come to really love from just my experience of using this camera is the monitor. I forget the exact size. I think it's like 5.5 inches or something. But the monitor on the back of this camera is super useful. It's not flip screen. That would be super nice if it was, but even just this normal flat built-in, the fact that it's so big and so clear makes shooting with this thing incredibly nice. Now, I know a lot of people, when this camera came out, there was tons of YouTube videos, everyone talked about how you had to use this camera in a cage. I actually found that I love using this camera handheld. It is hard because it doesn't have any stabilization, doesn't have any digital or optical sensor stabilization. So your footage will come out really shaky if you're not good at like stabilizing. But if you know how to shoot handheld, if you're comfortable with that, that's something that you're used to, you can get really beautiful handheld images with this, just, you know, in the body shape itself. That is my first con though. It's a really nice feeling camera to hold in one hand. I also have big hands. A lot of people complain that the grip is too big. I have big hands, so it fits perfectly, and I love that. But the first con is that while it is really nice to hold handheld, in a cage, it doesn't work super well. It just kind of makes it awkward to rig up, and then it ends up being really bigger than it needs to be when it's in a cage. So I mean, it's not the worst thing in the world, but that is my first con. Last thing I'm gonna talk about that I really like about this camera, and by the way, spoiler alert, my overall opinion and my experience with this camera have been very, very good. This is actually the camera I bought with like the last of my money that I had saved from my other job before I quit. And I took this camera and I started my own business with it. It was literally this body right here is basically all I had in my camera kit, this and a couple of small lenses. And I just went off and I started my own business with it. And so this is basically what all of this stuff around me is built up on. So kind of cool. Yeah, so spoiler alert, I really, really do like this camera a lot. But the last thing that I'm gonna talk about today is the adaptability as far as the audio goes. This thing has a 3.5mm input jack, just like most modern mirrorless cameras do. It's got your headphone jack to monitor. It's also got this mini XLR. Now, I wish it was full-size XLR, but mini XLR doesn't really have any drawbacks other than the fact that you have to have an adapter. But it's got, yeah, mini XLR with full phantom power support, and that is just super, super nice to be able to go on set, take shotgun mics like this one, and just plug straight into the camera, doing, you know, a small inline adapter right into the camera, and to have that full phantom power and then using professional audio. Cannot tell you how much I love that. First actual downside con of this camera, if you've done any kind of research at all about this camera, which most people have because this camera flooded the market when it came out, this camera does not have autofocus, and people really hate on it for that. However, I don't see this as the type of camera that people who need autofocus should be buying. So that's not really a downside for me. Like I said, I did most of my beginning work on this camera, and most of the work I did at first was documentary style stuff, was ads for restaurants and, you know, TV stuff. And for all of those style videos, I was always behind the camera, and I was always kind of like on a set subject and doing kind of preset shots. So even if I had autofocus on this camera, I wouldn't have used it. I would have turned it off and just, you know, locked focus or racked focus manually. But anyways, yeah, this camera doesn't have autofocus. And that is a downside if you need it. All right, another con, I think I talked a little bit about this before, but the micro 4/3 sensor. You can't see because I have a speed booster on this camera right now. This camera uses a 4/3 size sensor. Most mirrorless cameras, professional mirrorless cameras, use a full frame sensor. It's a 35mm sensor, and they use the full width of that sensor to read out the video. That's called full frame. This camera has a 4/3 size sensor, which is basically 1/2 the size of a normal full frame sensor. The reason this is considered a drawback by a lot of people is that the smaller the sensor, the bigger your noise is gonna be and the less sharp just naturally your image will be. And that's also a big thing with these cameras because they shoot RAW, which means that the image is not denoised in camera at all. The image is not even debayered, which that's a whole nother conversation, whether Blackmagic RAW is actually being debayered or whether you have any control of that, and I digress because that's a bunch of nerdy stuff that does not matter for this video. Yes, but anyways, micro 4/3 sensors, or 4/3 sensors as in this camera, tend to have a little bit less cleaner of an image. Also, the lenses that you're going to be using are going to be half as wide. So say you have a 16mm lens on this camera, 16mm would be super nice wide range for, you know, my Panasonic, it's a full frame. 16mm would be like perfect vlogging ratio. However, if I put a
Sorry.
However, if I put a 16mm lens on this camera, it would actually look like a 32mm lens, and 32mm would be a little bit tight for vlogging. So you're gonna need some really wide lenses if you're using this, or do what I do. I use a speed booster, and that actually gets the range a little bit wider. There's plenty of YouTube videos to explain that. Go watch DSLR video shooter, Caleb Pipe, or what's his name, Gerald and Nunn. Dude, if you want to watch an actual review, as I said, this is just me talking about my experiences. Want to see actual science, go watch Gerald and Nunn. The dude's amazing. All right, so another con about this camera, and I'm not gonna talk for a super long time about it because if you know anything about this camera, you know the battery life sucks. It does have an external adapter you can use, which is super nice. And if you're gonna be using this camera for professional use, use the adapter, use MPF batteries. That's what I do. I have an adapter with a plate that goes on the side. Perfect. It'll go for hours. The internal batteries only go for like 30 minutes at best. Battery life sucks. Con number 2, 3, whatever we're on, I don't know. Another thing that I have found extremely useful with this camera is the USB-C output. You can record straight to an SSD. Again, this is something that everyone talks about in their reviews. It's a really cool feature, but having used this camera on a day-to-day, that was a super clutch feature. I had a couple of T7 drives with the mount, and just recorded all my videos straight to that. I could edit them off of that SSD, and I could get really, really high quality recordings. And that's how I pretty much recorded all my bigger important videos on, was just using that USB-C output. So that is a super clutch feature. And my last cool, interesting note from using this camera is active cooling is severely underrated. This camera, a lot of people complain because it feels like plastic, but it has these nice little vents on top and vents on the bottom. And the way the body works is it's all open, and it has fans that pass air through over the sensor right from the top to the bottom. And I will say that active cooling is the most clutch feature on any piece of gear that I have had. I work in Yuma, Arizona. I do almost all my video work here, either in Yuma or in San Diego, basically in the Southwest. And so pretty much anywhere I have my camera and I'm working outside, it's gonna be really hot half the time. I have done a couple of video shoots on top of roofs for like roofing companies. And I think one time it was like 135 degrees on top of the roof that I measured with a thermometer. And if I had any other camera that did not have active cooling, there's no way it would have worked. In fact, I think I destroyed batteries doing that shoot. The batteries just stopped working after a while because it was so hot. But this camera with the active cooling never even, I mean, it got really hot to touch even, but it never had a warning, it never shut off. And that was a year and something ago. And then that actually didn't cause any damage to this camera because no signs of damage from using it on that really hot rooftop. So the active cooling is really, really nice. And so that is a quick overview of my thoughts and experiences with the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. The name is stupidly long, and it's even hard to say BMPCC 4K like everyone does. So I wish I had a different name. That'd be great. That's my only real complaint. But yeah, I love this camera. It worked really well for me. Again, I have moved on to the Panasonic line of cameras now, and that's what I use for most of my stuff. But in the time I was using this camera, it served me very well. Maybe we should have Brian come on and talk about how much he loves it though.
Once you get used to it, it's really good. But until then, it's very annoying. It's like learning how to use a gimbal. If you haven't used a gimbal before and you try and use a gimbal, it's not inherently difficult in and of itself. But until you get used to doing it, it just like, it feels off. You look at your clips afterwards, they look shaky. The manual focus, like you have to get used to which way it's gonna go, like it's gonna focus which way, making sure you have extra batteries or auxiliary batteries. Yeah, it's, I mean, really just like any other.
There's no viewfinder.
Really any other camera, you just have to get used to it, and once you do, it's pretty great. And frankly, the video quality it gives is up there, and it's really solid. So as long as you can figure out how to use it, it's, as the kids say, it's easy.
All right, and that concludes my basic thoughts on the Blackmagic Cinema Pocket Camera 4K.
Adios.
Thanks for watching. Hope you guys had a great day, and I will see you guys in the next video. Check this out. It's like camera